Hello. Hello, everyone. My name is Andraus. Thank you for joining us for the latest Kumi Now online gathering. As we address the environment in Palestine and the impact of occupation on it. We are joined today by Dr. Mazen Qumsiye of the Palestinian Museum of Natural History and Palestine, Institute for Biodiversity and Sustainability at Bethlehem University. Before we start, I would like to remind you that this session is being broadcast live on Facebook. If you don't wish to appear, please turn off your video feed. We would also love if you could quickly share one of the links that are being shared in chat so that others may join. Now I would like to let Dr. Mazen Qumsiye introduce himself and let him speak for as long as he wants. Then I will ask him your questions. Dr. Mazen?
Andraus, can you please allow me to share my screen?
Yes, for sure. Good?
No, it says host disabled participant screen sharing. Maybe you can make me a host or something.
Okay, 1 second.
Okay, let me try now. Yes, thank you.
No problem.
So here we go. And I hope everybody can see my screen now. Is it visible?
Yes, it is. Yes, yes, we can see it.
I need to make it full screen somehow.
Yes.
Once the ability to make it full screen.
I think maybe it's like the green bottom up.
Yeah. All right. This is good. Okay. Okay. This is good enough. Sorry about that.
No.
But background on me very briefly is I worked in the US for many years, came back to Palestine in 2008, and we started this Institute for Biodiversity and Sustainability in Palestine in 2014. And my background is related to biodiversity, environmental sciences, things like that. That's what I do most of my research on. However, I also dabble in other kinds of research. For example, I wrote a book on popular resistance in Palestine and a book called Sharing the Land of Canaan, which is about the one democratic state solution, but this is not our subject today, so I won't bother you with this now. I do want to talk about the environmental justice issues in Palestine. And Palestine geographically is this very important area that's a bottleneck between continents. Birds migrate through Palestine annually, but also humans migrated out of Africa to the rest of the world about 100,000 years ago through Palestine. Palestine is rich in biodiversity and flora and fauna. I don't have much time to talk about these things, but this richness allowed it also to be the Fertile Crescent where humans first developed agriculture. Of course, Zionism is a colonial movement that resulted in the ethnic cleansing of the local people in Palestine, has caused a lot of environmental damage, and I want to talk about this a little bit. Sometimes I can't change. Okay. But you know, whether inside the green line or outside the green line, there are what we call political engineering or socio-political engineering, but I could add socio-environmental political engineering to take a country that's multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-religious, and even multilingual or polylingual before 1948 and transform it to a Jewish state. This involved a lot of engineering, if you want. For example, if I look at where the settlements are built in the West Bank, from the Alon plan on the left panel, 1968, basically, to the current reality on the right, there has been a significant engineering of where to put Israeli settlements, Israeli colonies, and how to structure them. And this has to do with Zionist ideologies and Zionist political needs, if you want. And this engineering, of course, is harmful for the local people. And we as local people ended up in those shriveling enclaves, sort of like the Native Americans in the US. This is settler colonialism, which you expect, of course, has a lot of impact on the environment. How do I minimize this thing at the top? This bar at the top, can I get rid of it? I can't. No. Anyways, I guess it's okay. If I look, for example, at the population of Palestinians, 14 million Palestinians in the world, 8 million of us are refugees or displaced people. And the Palestinians that remain in the West Bank, which are collectively about 5 million Palestinians, are distributed between the Gaza and the West Bank. And this is their demographics and their situation, but it's not for the purpose of what we want to talk about. It's not relevant. The outside Palestinians, the ones in the refugee camps in Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, are not taken into account, and they live in very bad situations of basically 75 years of being refugees. So they're not included in the discussion. I want to talk about the environmental justice issues. For example, if I talk about water, the Palestinians in the refugee camps in Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan do not have access to Palestinian water, right? But Palestinians, even who remained inside what became the State of Israel in 1948, expanded to include the West Bank and Gaza in 1967. Those Palestinians who remain, about a little over 5 million in the West Bank and Gaza and 1.5 million inside the Green Line, those Palestinians are also denied access to water. How did this happen historically? I think that's an interesting question, and the more I research it, the more I realize that water issues were a key to the Zionist plans from the beginning. For example, diversion of the water from the Jordan River Basin from Lake Tiberias to the west, that was devastating environmentally. It was not to create new agricultural lands. In fact, very little new agricultural lands was created. It was basically to do replacement agriculture. And what I mean by that replacement agriculture is agriculture that was done, rain-fed agriculture in the western parts of the country that our ancestors lived on, for thousands of years, like wheat and barley and lentils, chickpeas, and so forth. Those fields were devastated, and a replacement agriculture was created, which is to have irrigated agriculture, avocados, tomatoes, cucumbers, things like that. This is what replacement agriculture did in the western part of the country. But the diversion of the water of the Jordan Valley did something else, which is on the eastern part of the country, it devastated the Jordan River basin. And basically, if you look, for example, at the Jordan River, it decreased from 1,350 million cubic meters per year to 20 million cubic meters per year, and resulted in desertification, which you can see even in the satellite image on the right side, the desertification that's spreading around the Dead Sea and the Jordan River basin in the south, and spreading north as we speak. But when I say 20 million cubic meters per year, that is no longer a river, really. You cannot really rightly call it River Jordan. You can call it Jordan Stream or Jordan whatever, shallow crook, if you want, or whatever. A creek, I guess, is the proper English term for it. In fact, in the southern part of it, it is no longer even, it's only 1.2 meters long, which is about the length of your arm or whatever. And this resulted, of course, in shrinkage of this inland lake, which is mistakenly called the Dead Sea. It is neither dead, by the way, nor a sea. It's an inland salty lake, used to be called Lake Lot, after the biblical figure Lot. But anyway, the Dead Sea is shrinking, and this shrinking Dead Sea is causing further environmental damage to the areas around it. There has been also the drainage of the wetlands of the Hula area, which resulted in disappearance of both human and natural communities in the area. Palestinians were expelled from around Lake Hula and the wetlands of the Hula. Picture on the left, basically, there were about 15 Palestinian communities there. They were all ethnically cleansed. And but this also not impacted just humans. It impacted the local fauna and flora, and over 219 species of animals disappeared from the wetland of the Hula area. Here's the Dead Sea. Sorry, slide out of order, but this is how much water is going into the Dead Sea shrinkage and how much is taken. And what we have is minus 700 million cubic meters flowing into the Dead Sea when you count outflow and evaporation, and the fact that Israel is using evaporating large numbers of the Dead Sea in the south as you see in the picture on the right, to create those basically evaporative bins for extraction of the salts and the minerals of the Dead Sea. Now, in the Jordan Valley, which I take as an example, not just the Dead Sea, there has been devastating ecological damage done. The picture on the right shows the Israeli designated so-called nature reserves in green. And also it shows in red the so-called military zones that Israel declared in the Jordan Valley. Now, you don't have to be a genius in mapping to realize that there's a lot of so-called nature reserves created as also military zones, which of course, according to international law, is forbidden. If you declare a nature reserve, you cannot make it a military training ground for your military and bomb the shit out of it. But this is what is done in this area regularly in our country. Israel's so-called Parks and Nature Authority, National Parks and Nature Reserve Authority, is not the one who declares these reserves. They're the ones who implement, who actually run the nature reserves. So you might ask, well, wait a minute, who declares nature reserves in Israel? Here, you would be surprised. It's actually the Jewish National Fund, which is a supranational entity created in 1905 as a Zionist organization to basically colonize the land of Palestine and make it a Jewish state. This Jewish National Fund, Keren Kayemet Israel, which declared, for example, a lot of nature reserves in the, I want to show you, in nature reserves in the Negev region. Maybe I don't have a picture of that. But anyway, the nature reserves in the Negev, nature reserves in the Galilee are declared by the Jewish National Fund. And the idea of declaring those as nature reserves is because the Negev and the Galilee still have Palestinians. And of course, the West Bank still has a lot of Palestinians. So the new law that's just passed a few weeks ago in the Israeli Knesset that gave the Israeli jurisdiction over nature reserves in the West Bank, that they designated basically for political, for settlement use and for military use, as in the case of the Jordan Valley. They give them now essentially annexed to Israel, technically, if you want. So this is a problem for us because, as I said, the intention of declaring nature reserves by Israel was not about the value of these areas as nature areas. Now, there are some valuable nature areas. The map in the middle actually shows our map, my map, of actually what I consider important biodiversity areas in the West Bank, at least in the southern part of the West Bank. And these are areas we try to protect both on the eastern slopes, including Wadi Kelt and other areas, and along the Jordan River, etc., along the Dead Sea. But these are different maps than what the Israelis produced for protected areas or for nature reserves. Why? Because our method of determining what's worthy of conservation is dependent on international criteria, including the IUCN criteria, whereas that's for the biodiversity, for nature, whereas the Israeli criteria, really only one major criterion, which is that it is a method for advancing the Zionist project. So now, in terms of natural resources, also this tells you something about, when we talked about diversion of the water. Water diversion is started in the 1920s under British rule, and it accelerated, of course, after Israel was created in 1948 and taken over Palestinian water. And this graphic from Visualizing Palestine, which I highly recommend if you want to use visuals in your presentations about Palestine, is to use Visualizing Palestine graphics. Shows what happens to water from the rain and how it's misallocated. So the Palestinians, which is our water basically, get very little water. When really the water even falls on the Palestinian areas like Ramallah, 619 millimeters London, for example, is 596 millimeters. So actually, Ramallah gets more water than London, but the allocation of it is that it's stolen and taken to settlements. This graphic also shows this in another way, that we get less than what the World Health Organization recommends for healthy living. Actually, the latest number, this is way outdated. The latest number for the Gaza Strip is 9, not 55 as shown here. 9 liters per capita per day. Okay, now the devastation of our environment, of course, involves other things. Blockage, for example, roads, walls, infrastructure for the settlers, etc. The map on the left shows the route of the wall so far, and it's still being built. It's deep in the West Bank to include the major settlement blocks in the West Bank. But its impact on biodiversity is devastating. We wrote a paper about it. I don't have too much time to go through this. Infrastructure also for Israelis, Israeli bypass roads are additional infrastructure, which you see on this map from a region, from the Land Research Center and from Birzeit University. These maps show basically the where these bypass roads that are built, and at least some of them, and how they broke up the West Bank, and also how they increased devastation of the area around. The picture on the lower right-hand corner shows a settlement on the top next to the wall, and then a Palestinian area. And then you see the stream that's coming from the settlement through the wall and coming to Palestinian homes here on this side of the area, in Tul Karam area. This is an issue of industrial and residential pollutants produced by colonial settlers to pollute our environment. For example, one of my students studied the village of Brooklyn, which gets dumped on by sewage from the industrial settlement of Burkan, or Barkan as Israelis call it. And this has caused DNA damage, chromosome damage, chromosome breaks, etc., which leads to increased cancer rates, increased congenital birth defects, and skin disorders, infertility, and other things. Here are the industrial zones in the West Bank. There are at least 12. There's probably more that are being built and still to be studied. This map is from Arij a few years ago. But these industrial settlements dump a lot of toxic waste on us. And they're illegal, by the way. Per international law, occupying armies cannot build industries in the occupied areas. And they are devastating for our environment. Now, sorry, I'm jumping here, but the issue of natural resources like water, stealing our natural resources is common for colonial powers. And if we look at gas and oil, I'm not particularly a fan of gas and oil development in any country. By the way, I look for environmentally friendly systems. But Israel has developed an infrastructure for gas and oil extractions, including from throughout Palestine, not just the green, within the green line of 1948 ceasefire line, but in other areas of Palestine, and they take it for their use. For example, the Mari B field is now connected to a grid of gas fields, as you see on the map on the right, that supplies Israel with natural gas. This is a gas field off the coast of Gaza, and sorry. Here is the fields off the coast of Gaza. And if you're wondering why Gaza is besieged, your answer is right here in this figure. This shows that there's nice and large gas field just opposite the coast of Gaza. And actually under the partition resolution of the UN 1947, this area, including Ashkelon and all this area, Ashkelon, all the area that the other gas fields occur are supposed to go to the Palestinian state, not the Israeli state. But here's the reason, basically, why Gaza is besieged and why Gaza fishermen are not allowed to go into the sea more than 6 miles. Because precisely at 7 miles, you get this Mari B, which is already developed and Israel is already using it. They don't want the Gaza population to get close to Mari B gas fields. So that's why they isolate and starve Gaza, basically. This is the actual reason for this. Ironically, Israel developed a project that's supposedly going to be funded by the World Bank and the IMF to transport gas back. So here's Mari B, okay, which is connected to the grid of gas in the Israeli areas. And they are exploiting it. This is our gas again, and they shouldn't be stealing it. But anyway, they are taking this gas, they're supplying themselves with it, and now they want to sell it to the people of Gaza through this dashed, basically connecting pipeline that comes in an area here in Gaza. This area, precisely where they cut this gas field in Gaza, is Wadi Gaza, which is a natural area that has endangered even animals and plants in Gaza. All right, here's the map I wanted to show you earlier. Again, my slides are out of order, and because I put them together quickly, and because I was traveling for the past 19, 20 days and didn't have much sleep, so, so you'll have to excuse me for this. But here is the nature reserves throughout historic Palestine that's designated by Israel. Now, you notice anything about where all these green areas are, the so-called protected areas that Israel designated? It's interesting that a lot of the protected areas are in the Galilee, which there are still some Palestinians in the Galilee, in the triangle area here, where there are still some Palestinians, and in the Negev. Huge areas in the Negev are designated as nature reserves to isolate the Bedouins of the Negev and prevent them from accessing these areas. And they really persecute them. You know, for example, if camels or sheep or goats of these Bedouins wander into these areas, they fine them huge fines because they claim these are nature areas. But really, they're not nature areas because they're rich in biodiversity. They're there to exclude the Negev Bedouins and limit them to certain areas of the northern Negev. The Bedouins there are, I think, 33 communities, and Israel wants to consolidate them into 3 communities, actually. That plan originally was called the Plan to Concentrate, to create concentration areas for the Bedouins of the Negev. This is what they called it originally. And then I guess somebody pointed out to them that this is not a politically kosher way of describing the project. So they changed its name. Now it's called the Power Plan, but it is still the same project of squeezing the remaining Bedouins of the Negev into these limited areas. In the West Bank, by the way, this is another irony. There is a group called Haymanuta, and we have limited information. Peace Now gathered some interesting information about turning over these red areas that you see here to this organization, which is a settler organization in the West Bank, and saying that they are responsible for that. Now, the whole idea is again related to Zionist projects. So when Israel, for example, was created and destroyed 500 and plus Palestinian communities, removed most of the trees that were there, or all of them, whether domesticated trees or wild trees. Domesticated trees like, figs and almonds and olives, and wild trees like oaks and hawthorn and carobs. They planted to replace this polyculture with the monoculture of pine trees. The problem with pine trees is they burn fast and they have a devastating impact on biodiversity because it's a monoculture. It doesn't allow much of growth and the under the trees of other kinds of brushes or whatever. This is about bypass roads. We already talked about that. I want to just say a few words about Jerusalem and its environment, because Jerusalem is the capital of Palestine. It is historically very important for religious people in our country, Muslims, Christians, and Jews. It is being Judaicized, and you will get another Kumi now talk about Jerusalem on these issues, if you haven't already in this cycle, but I covered Jerusalem before. Now, I want to talk about Jerusalem in one aspect only, which is the aspect of creation, what's called national parks. Israel has national parks, and they also have nature reserves. We talked about nature reserves, which are not really about nature, but they also have what's called national parks. The green areas here around Jerusalem were declared national parks. What's the difference with national parks and nature reserves? National parks, according to the Israeli system, are areas of historic and human significance, and humans live there. By humans, they mean, of course, Israelis, not Palestinians. So the idea of national parks in the area of Jerusalem is to remove Palestinians from Jerusalem for the sake of expanding these national parks. And you probably have heard about Silwan and about Sheikh Jarrah and those areas in and around Jerusalem. Here's other maps that show these areas. For example, the map on the left, this is the local outline plans of Jerusalem and its development and its isolation via national parks that exclude Palestinian development. So in Silwan, for example, they say because it's a national park, the city of David and all of this stuff, Palestinians cannot develop. But it doesn't say that Israelis cannot develop. Israelis do develop settlements within the so-called national park. In the same way with nature reserves, it says Palestinians cannot develop in the nature reserves and cannot use the nature reserves for their purposes like herding sheep and camels, but that Israelis can do that. Israelis can build settlements and they can do anything they want to in these areas. I'll skip this one. So here's, for example, Canada Park. This is a park, so to speak, funded by the Canadian Jewish community. It was built after destruction of 3 Palestinian villages there biblical villages, even like Amwas. And they removed the people, the Palestinian people in there, and they developed this Canada National Park. I'll skip this one. Oops. And this one. Well, maybe I'll say a few words about this area. This is an area west of Bethlehem. Some of you may know this area, like, because when you come here, they tell you go see Batir, beautiful spring here. There's Al-Walaja, where I was arrested in Al-Walaja more than a dozen times. No, 6 or 7 times. Total, I was arrested 12 times or more. But in Al-Walaja, which is being, of course, eaten by the settlements like Har, Gilo, and Gilo on the other side, etc. This rich area of Batir, Al-Walaja, and Hussan are rich agricultural fields of people in this, and in fact was declared the World Heritage Site. This is the World Heritage Site property. You can see the core zone in this pinkish color, and then the buffer zone around it. And this UNESCO World Heritage Site, because we have practiced agriculture in harmony with nature for thousands of years in this area. And we, as Palestinians, just declared this area a protected area that you see in the white line. This is a new settlement being started in the western part of Wadi Makhrur, the eco, and this is in the buffer zone of the World Heritage Site. I actually wrote to the UNESCO, head of UNESCO about this, and I was surprised that he responded and said he will talk to Israel about it, because they're building a new settlement in the middle of the buffer zone. This would be about the middle of the picture. Here is where the new settlement will be built. That's to connect the settlements of Har Gilo, which is in the northeast side of the valley here, Har Gilo, with the settlements of Bitar Elite here. So the new settlement comes in this area in the middle between those two blue settlements. Israel has also developed this bypass road and expanding it now. You can see becoming a 6-lane highway basically for settlers, connecting the settlements of Gush Etzion with Jerusalem, with the East and West Jerusalem settlements or colonies. And this has also had an impact on the environment. This is a picture from Walaja with the segregation wall in the foreground. They took basically most of the land, most of the valley that's down the valley of Walaja. And in this area on the left is West Jerusalem. On the right is East Jerusalem, in which they are building these settlements like Gilo. This is the expansion of the settlement of Gilo on the right-hand side of the picture. As a result of these activities, the Walaja people are isolated from their land. Their wall is being built on top of the hill here, and they're isolated from their land. And they use the excuse again of national parks, etc., to prevent people. For example, Ain al-Haniya was taken, and it's now called the Judean Mountain National Park. Again, remember, national park, according to Israeli definition, means it has a historical significance to people. But in this case, of course, they exclude the people. They say historical significance to people, but they added the word Judean mountains to make it as if it's a Jewish importance. And in Hebrew, you know, the language is about basically the periphery of Jerusalem Park and the importance to Jerusalem. They plan to develop all this area that they declared national parks that you see in pink color here. This is to expand the Israeli settlements by the excuse of national park systems. This is in Hebron H1, H2. I don't have to talk about that. One last example of environmental devastation is the South Hebron Hills. South Hebron Hills, this is a map of them. The wall projection is to come along the line that you see in black here or in another color here. But this area that's surrounded in red is a very interesting area. This is declared both a nature reserve and also a military zone. Again, you know, this diabolic connection between a nature reserve and a military zone. The military zone is to exclude Palestinians, so Israel wants to remove all the communities within this red area of the South Hebron Hills, outside of this area, to go to Yatta or wherever in other Palestinian areas that are left there. And the reason for that is pretty obvious, you know, it's has to do with trimming the West Bank, if you want, like, again, geopolitical engineering to create what they want, which is based on the lone plan we talked about. This map is from B'Tselem, and this other map is also from B'Tselem or the Land Research Center, enlarging this quote unquote military training zone. This is the Israeli map of the area, showing the land that they wanted to expropriate in red, and the latest round of expropriation of the area in the South Hebron Hills. Sorry, I cannot move now. Let's see why. Are you still with me? Do you hear me? I cannot.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I don't know why I cannot move the slides anymore. Okay, I don't see a mouse even. Jesse, you have a mouse? For a minute.
It is not working.
Still not working.
Okay, the trackpad doesn't work.
Yeah.
The arrow doesn't work.
I need to stop share. Share.
Doctor, if you want, we can start with the questions meanwhile.
Maybe you can, yeah, let's start the question. Maybe in the meantime, if you can, Andreas, just end my presentation or stop the sharing from your end. Maybe that will help.
Okay, so the first question is Israel a member of the Biodiversity Convention? And what about their obligation under the convention? Do our members keep them accountable?
That's a very good question. Israel did sign the Convention on Biological Diversity and about 15 other conventions related to things that we are talking about, like environmental justice and things like that. And under these conventions, actually Israel should be expelled from these conventions because of their violations. I am now preparing a file on just the issue of the protected areas alone, the issue of the so-called nature reserves alone, to go to the Convention on Biological Diversity and challenge Israel on this issue of declaring nature reserves used to expand settlements or for military training zones and not really for nature conservation. Mainly to exclude Palestinians. And I think there's a very, very good case, well documented, that can be presented to basically tell the conventions what's called the Conference of Parties, or COP. The Conference of Parties should be told Israel has two choices: either withdraw from the convention or be expelled from the convention, or they should comply with the convention. And I think there's a very good case for this. Our main problem is that I, as an individual or as an institution, cannot submit this case. It has to be the Palestinian Authority to submit this, because both the Palestinian Authority, State of Palestine, and the State of Israel are signatories to this agreement. So one party could complain about another party. So as individuals or as NGOs or as academia, we cannot do this, basically. So this limits us, and we have to wait till the Palestinian Authority agrees to, and then of course they are subject to a lot of political pressures and blackmail, basically, from the US and Israel, which control all the flow of money into the Palestinian areas. Other questions?
Yes, there are several. How significant is the ECO Peace Organization, which involves Israel, Palestine, and Jordan?
ECO Peace is a group that was established by Israelis, including retired Israeli military people, generals, etc., with the idea of using ecology for what they term peace. Now, I don't term their peace as our peace. Their peace is pacification. And so it is one of those many normalizing groups that tries to distract from the main problems. And in my opinion, they don't help the environment. They end up hurting the environment because it ends up normalizing the status quo. And I'll give you a very simple example. This issue I mentioned to you of nature reserves, EcoPeace would not touch it with a 10-foot pole. They would not want to be involved in any discussion about this issue or going to the Convention on Biological Diversity, etc. So what do? Well, what they do is say they put some owl boxes in the Jordan Valley, collaboration between the Israeli activists, supposed environmental activists, and some Palestinians who are willing to engage with them. And they then publicize this widely, and they use a lot of propaganda to say that they are doing all this collaborative environmental protection with Palestinians. And so it's used mostly for public relations rather than actual effect. And when I ask, for example, let's see the actual evidence that what you did actually made a difference on the ground in the lives of people or even the lives of nature in those areas, it's hard to come by any evidence of this other than, holding these collaborative activities, workshops, joint activities like education about birds and things like that.
Okay. Someone is asking, will the presentation be available?
Yes, I'm happy to share it with you. Anybody can email me at info@palestinenature.org, which is our website. So I'm happy to share my slides.
Another one is asking, where do we find the reference for the 9 liters per capita per day for Gazans, please?
Yeah, you can send me Palestine Hydrology Group has a lot of the data there. I managed to figure out how to move this out of the way. So anyways, let me just go back to share. Okay. Yeah, I think on the slide itself. Nah, this is very weird. When I go slide share, the mouse sign disappears, but at least, okay. Anyways, it's okay. Yeah, I
A reference, yes.
so I'm happy to send these references to you. Many hydrological studies. We just did a study on environmental justice issues in Palestine, just completed 2 months ago, with 600 references, including a whole section on water issues and other issues like nature reserves, etc. While I'm not at liberty to share the study yet because it's not published, I can certainly share with you the references regarding water and things like that.
Very good. Someone's asking, can we get the link to the article in the stream that was polluting the Palestinian village from the settlement? What was the name of the village?
Yeah, I can, if somebody wants that, they can email. I don't recall it off the top of my head, but it's near Tul Karam area. And I can get you the name of the settlement plus the name of the Palestinian village.
Okay.
Just again, email me. What I'll do is I'll put in the chat my email for people to.
Yeah, the best thing to do is. Yeah, another question is, did they remove the trees by burning them?
No, bulldozing them. The same they did, by the way, for this segregation wall that they built. Segregation wall alone destroyed over 2 million Palestinian trees. And they did that by bulldozing them. And in Al-Walaja, for example, we were standing in front of these bulldozers that are uprooting like 2,000-year-old olive trees or almond trees or fig trees and things like that.
Another question. I saw in 2016 that the loss of water from the Jordan River was causing the water table to drop because of a high salt content around the Dead Sea area. Large sinkholes were occurring. Is that continuing?
Yes, and it's accelerating. Accelerating because of Israel's need for extraction of minerals of the Dead Sea. And since half of it, or almost half of it, 40% of it, has already, as a surface area, has already disappeared, and there's not enough water because to extract the minerals, you have to have water mixed with the soil and then let it settle, and then the salts rise, and then the salts settle basically when they dry. These salt ponds then are scraped for the salt content, which then is the minerals and so forth are extracted from it. To do this process, Israel installed the largest pump perhaps in the world, but certainly the largest pump in the Middle East, that pumps water from the northern part of the Dead Sea to the southern part, which has already dried up. And this water is used to flood these soils, and they mix it with the soil, and then the salt rises, as I said, and then it evaporates because very high temperature there, so it evaporates. So obviously this increases evaporation potential, and the Dead Sea acceleration and dropping of the surface area is now losing, I don't remember the number, but square kilometers per year, literally, and it's really devastating the Dead Sea. So, and again, all of this data is available on our database, and we have a database of environmental justice with the proper references on it. So I'm happy to share any of these information, at least the references part of it, with people. And yeah, the sinkholes is another problem. Nobody has studied the impact of the sinkholes on biodiversity. I have a German intern now who's doing studies on biodiversity around the Dead Sea, and we will address some of these environmental challenges around the Dead Sea.
Okay, I think that's it. There are no more any questions. Like if you like to say something at the end or.
Yes, how many people are here? There are 63 people. So obviously, we could use your help. We could use your help in publicizing environmental injustice issues. And the nice thing about talking about the environment is the evidence is there, the data is there, it's all scientific data. It would be hard to accuse you of being against Israel, for example, or being anti-Semitic or whatever, if you're really describing what's happening at the environmental level and how the lives of people and nature are suffering because of this. So please include these kinds of information. That's why I'm happy to share and answer questions with you when you talk to others about this. And expand the circle of knowledge about Palestinian issues and the injustice that's happening here. The second point I'd like to make is that our institute is engaged in research, education, conservation, and community service, leading towards our vision of sustainable human and natural community. Our website is palestinenature.org. We could use volunteers. We have volunteers so far from more than 45 countries. And we welcome you to volunteer here to work with us. Just check our website, go on our Facebook page. Again, you can search for Palestine Institute for Biodiversity and Sustainability or Palestine Museum of Natural History. I'm sure you'll find our Facebook page. Share the information there. You can see our activities and our plans. We regularly talk to groups about these things. I am traveling to the US in August. If you happen to be from the US and you like to help in organizing activities for us, my wife and I are going to the US. She's a co-director, again, volunteer like me in this institute. And finally, to stay in touch with us, please send us your email address. If you're not on our email list, we send a message about every week. For example, I sent a message about the 2 days ago about the COP meetings that are coming up for climate change and what our statement as Palestinians regarding issues of climate change. So to join our email list, just email me again at info@palestinenature.org. It's found in the chat room, or look me up on Facebook or Messenger or whatever. Thank you very much for doing this. Kumi now is doing excellent work. Join them, support them.
Thank you, Dr. Mazen, and thank you everyone for joining us today. A link to a video of this gathering, along with all the links shared today, will be available on the Kumi Now website and on YouTube in a day or so. And it will be shared in the next newsletter. You can subscribe to Kumi Now on YouTube and subscribe to our newsletter to make sure you receive them. We would greatly appreciate if you share this session with your friends and colleagues, as well as information in our future webinars. I would like to thank our guest, Dr. Mazen Kumsi, for being with us today. Thank you for your time and your work. Next week, we will look at issues around tourism and pilgrims. If you like to be reminded of an online gathering an hour before they begin, you can register for email reminders at kuminow.com/online using the form at the bottom of the page. Hope to see you back here next week. Thanks again and good night.